At some point, you realize the world isn't just against you, it's quietly deciding to watch you fail, not with shouts or fights, but with silence, delays, and subtle control. Most men never notice until it's too late. This is the moment where survival isn't about effort, honesty, or persistence. It's about becoming unreadable, unpredictable, and untouchable. Welcome to the rules no one teaches, where power is taken silently, and men are eliminated without a single blow. At some point, you realize something disturbing. It's not that people hate you, it's worse. They've already decided you won't make it. You notice it in the way support quietly disappears, in how rules suddenly apply only to you, and how mistakes you make are permanent while others get forgiven. And the most dangerous part, no one tells you, because when everyone is against you, they don't attack, they wait. They wait for you to over-explain, they wait for you to apologize, they wait for you to doubt yourself. That's how men get eliminated without a fight. Machiavelli understood this. When opposition is everywhere, confrontation is rare, control happens through silence, delays, and denial of momentum. This is the moment where most men destroy themselves. They try to be fair. They try to be understood. They try to win back approval from people who already placed their bet against them. That's why they lose, because when everyone is against you, success doesn't come from effort, honesty, or persistence. It comes from changing how you move. This video is about the exact shift men make when the world quietly decides to watch them fail, and how the few who understand this rise anyway, not by fighting the system, by outgrowing it. When everyone is against you, the first thing that disappears is clarity, not yours. The environment's rules stop being consistent, feedback stops being honest, signals stop making sense. You can do the same action twice and get two different reactions. That is not randomness. That is hostility without declaration. Most men don't recognize this state because they are waiting for open conflict. They expect resistance to look like arguments, insults, or rejection. That's naive. Open resistance is inefficient. When opposition is mature, it doesn't fight you, it contains you. You are still allowed to exist. You are still allowed to work. You are still allowed to speak. But your actions no longer move outcomes. Decisions are delayed. Momentum is slowed. Access is restricted without explanation. You are being managed, not opposed. This is the stage where weak men self-destruct. They assume the system is still neutral. They believe effort will be noticed. They think good behavior will be rewarded. So they give more availability, more cooperation, more transparency. That generosity feels noble. It is lethal because in hostile environments, generosity is read as leverage surrender. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. He warned that when circumstances turn against you, virtue becomes a liability if it is not paired with control. Control begins with information. And the first mistake men make when everyone is against them is giving away too much of it. They explain what they are doing, they announce intentions, they clarify motives, they think clarity will protect them. But clarity only helps allies. To adversaries, clarity is reconnaissance. Once others know your direction, they can block paths in advance. Once they know your limits, they can pressure you precisely. Once they know what you care about, they can weaponize it. That is why predictability is fatal at this stage. Predictable men are easy to neutralize without confrontation. They speed up when pressured, they talk more when ignored, they react emotionally when provoked. Each reaction confirms what opponents already suspected, that you can still be moved. Once that conclusion is reached, escalation is unnecessary. You will manage yourself. This is how power is removed without force. You begin editing your behavior to avoid friction. You soften positions before they are challenged. You wait for approval instead of acting. You think you are being strategic. You are being trained. And the training has one goal: to make you harmless. Harmless men are not eliminated. They are kept busy, kept hopeful, kept compliant. They are allowed to exist because they no longer threaten outcomes. This is why many men don't realize everyone is against them until years have passed. Nothing dramatic happened, no betrayal, no explosion, just stagnation. And stagnation feels safe enough to tolerate until you realize what it costs. Time, authority, self-rust. By the time you feel the loss, the position is already gone. This is why Machiavelli emphasized timing over morality, not because morality is useless, but because morality without leverage is decoration. When everyone is against you, your first responsibility is not to be understood. It is to remain dangerous. Dangerous does not mean violent. It means unpredictable, self-contained, and unmoved by pressure. And that requires abandoning a belief most men cling to, that fairness will eventually correct the imbalance. It won't. Systems do not self-correct for individuals, they correct for stability. And stability often requires your suppression. Once you see this clearly, the situation becomes simpler, not easier, simpler, because now the question is no longer why is this happening to me? The question becomes, how do men operate when opposition is total and visibility is a liability? That answer does not come from effort. It comes from repositioning, and that is what comes next. When opposition becomes total, your instincts turn against you, not because you are weak, because they were trained for safety, not survival. Human instincts evolved inside groups. Belonging meant protection. Rejection meant death. That wiring is ancient, and when pressure rises, it activates automatically. This is why when resistance appears, most men don't harden, they appease. They become clearer, kinder, more reasonable. They assume misunderstanding caused the friction. That belief feels intelligent. It is catastrophic because hostile environments do not misunderstand you. They understand you perfectly. They simply do not want you to advance. So when you respond with openness, you are not resolving tension, you are exposing leverage. Machiavelli warned that men under threat retreat into virtue, hoping it will shield them. It never does. Virtue without leverage is a signal that you can still be pressured. This is where conditioning reveals itself. From childhood, cooperation was rewarded, compliance was praised, explanation was encouraged, teachers reinforced it, parents normalized it, institutions depended on it. You learned that clarity equals safety. That rule works in neutral environments. It collapses in hostile ones. Because when everyone is against you, clarity gives them your direction, your priorities, your limits. They stop guessing. And once they stop guessing, they stop fearing you. Fear is not created by aggression, it is created by uncertainty. The moment others can predict how you will react under pressure, your influence erodes. This is why pressure escalates subtly. First they interrupt, then they delay, then they question, then they ignore. Each step tests one thing: will you regulate yourself to preserve harmony? Most men do. They explain, they justify, they compromise, they believe they are adapting. What they are actually doing is teaching others how to manage them. Once that lesson is learned, opposition no longer needs coordination, you become administrable. And here is the most dangerous shift. You internalize resistance as self-doubt. You question your instincts, your ambition, your timing. This conflict is not accidental. When external pressure meets internal doubt, you neutralize yourself. No one has to stop you anymore. You slow down voluntarily. You lower expectations. You aim smaller. You call it maturity. It is submission. Machiavelli understood that power is lost internally long before it disappears externally. That is why he warned rulers to guard perception relentlessly, especially their own. When everyone is against you, the greatest danger is not attack. It is re-education. Re-education to seek approval again. Re-education to distrust your judgment. Re-education to wait. Waiting feels safe. Waiting feels intelligent. Waiting feels moral. Waiting is how men are removed without force, because time is not neutral here. The longer you remain visible without advancement, the more stagnation becomes your identity, your ceiling solidifies. Reversal becomes difficult, then probable. This is why men who survive total opposition behave counterintuitively. They reduce visibility, they stop narrating progress, they stop defending positions, they disengage from conversations that do not alter outcomes. This is not retreat, it is compression. They pull energy inward because every explanation leaks power. Every emotional reaction feeds the system. Every attempt to be understood confirms dependency. At this stage, your task is not to be liked, trusted, or validated. Your task is to become unreadable. Unreadable men cannot be managed easily. Unreadable men force hesitation, and hesitation is where leverage returns. But this requires killing a reflex that once kept you safe. The urge to correct the record. You want to clarify, you want to fix misconceptions. You want to defend intent. That impulse feels righteous. It is lethal. Because those who misunderstand you intentionally are not confused. They are positioning. Every correction reveals where you still care. And where you care is where pressure will return. This is why Machiavelli advised restraint over explanation. Silence here is not passivity. It is resistance. It denies data. It denies timing. It denies certainty. When you stop reacting, the environment loses feedback, and systems without feedback destabilize. The shift does not happen outwardly first. It happens internally, because now you are no longer responding to the world, you are recalibrating yourself. And once your instincts are retrained away from approval and toward outcome, you stop registering as manageable. That is when pressure changes shape. But before that, understand this clearly. If everyone is against you, your instincts are lying, and trusting them without modification is how most men eliminate themselves. What replaces them is not emotion, it is structure. Once you realize your instincts were trained to keep you safe, not powerful, line appears. Most men sense it, very few cross it, because crossing it means accepting a brutal truth. You will never be perceived fairly again. From this point forward, neutrality is gone. When everyone has already decided who you are, any attempt to prove otherwise only confirms their control. The more you try to demonstrate value, the the more you look like you need permission to exist. This is the psychological trap. Men think the solution is better performance, more output, more excellence. But excellence without positioning only increases expectations, not authority. You become useful, not dangerous, and useful men are exploited, not elevated. This is why the moment of reversal never looks impressive from the outside. It looks like withdrawal, like arrogance, like loss of interest. In reality, it is refusal. Refusal to explain, refusal to react, refusal to continue playing a game that was designed to contain you. Machiavelli understood that when a man is placed inside a hostile structure, the worst mistake is to play harder by the structure's rules. That only proves obedience, so instead power is reclaimed by Chang. Orientation, not what you do, but what you respond to. At this stage, the most important skill is not action. It is non-response. You stop reacting to provocation. You stop answering questions that are designed to probe. You stop correcting narratives that were never meant to be corrected. This feels wrong at first. Your nervous system panics. Silence feels like weakness. Distance feels like loss. Not reacting feels like surrender. That is conditioning speaking. In reality, reaction is what feeds hostile systems. Reaction gives them rhythm. Reaction gives them information. When you remove reaction, you remove traction. And traction is what allows pressure to move you. This is where most men fail. They cannot tolerate the discomfort of being misunderstood. They rush to restore balance. They rush to be seen accurately again. But power does not require accuracy. It requires indifference to misinterpretation. When you stop caring how you are framed, others lose the ability to frame you. This is when the environment begins to destabilize. Not because you attack it, but because it loses a predictable participant. You are no longer cooperating with expectations, and systems are fragile. When expectations break, here is the internal shift that marks the point of no return. You stop asking, how do I win here? And start asking, why am I still here? That question is dangerous, because once you see that the structure itself is designed to cap you, staying becomes self-betrayal. So you begin the separation, not physically at first, psychologically. You disengage from validation loops. You stop measuring progress through feedback. You stop outsourcing self-rust. This is where loneliness intensifies, not social loneliness, strategic loneliness. You are no longer aligned with the group's incentives. Their rewards no longer motivate you. Their punishments no longer scare you. That makes you abnormal. Abnormal men are not controlled easily. But this stage comes with a cost that few talk about. You lose the comfort of being right. You lose the reassurance of consensus. You lose the emotional relief of agreement. You must carry uncertainty alone, and most men cannot tolerate that weight. They would rather be wrong together than alone and unanchored. This is why only a minority cross this threshold, because after this point you cannot return to unconscious participation. You see the mechanics too clearly. You see how praise is used to domesticate, how criticism is used to redirect, how silence is used to punish. Once seen, it cannot be unseen. And now you must choose: either retreat back into compliance and accept the ceiling you were given, or continue forward and accept permanent friction. Because from this point on, resistance will change form. It will no longer be obvious. It will no longer be emotional. It will become structural. Access disappears. Opportunities rot. Doors close quietly. This is the cost of becoming uncontrollable. But it is also the beginning of real leverage, because now your actions are no longer shaped by approval. They are shaped by outcome, and outcome-driven men eventually force recalibration around them, not through noise, through inevitability. But to survive what comes next, you need more than silence. You need a system that replaces instinct entirely, because instinct will keep pulling you back towards safety, and safety is exactly where you will be neutralized. What comes next is not philosophy, it is architecture. And without it, crossing this line would have been pointless. Once instinct is no longer trusted, something must replace it. If it doesn't, you collapse. Men who reach this stage without structure don't regain power. They destabilize. They confuse chaos with freedom. They become inconsistent, paranoid, reactive. Opposition doesn't defeat them. Entropy does. Machiavelli warned against this failure. A ruler who destroys. The old order without installing a new one becomes weaker than what he overthrew. So this phase is not about aggression. It is about governance. But governance of the self, the first rule of the internal regime, is absolute. You do not negotiate with yourself. Most men live internally as democracies. Every urge gets a vote. Every feeling is considered. That system feels humane. It is fatal under pressure. When everyone is against you, hesitation is punished instantly. So the internal structure must resemble a dictatorship. Clear authority, clear consequences. No debate. There is command, there is execution. Nothing else. This means separating identity from behavior. You stop asking how you feel about tasks. You stop waiting for motivation. You stop interpreting resistance emotionally. Behavior becomes procedural. If condition X exists, action Y follows. No dialogue, no justification. This is how men function under fire, and psychologically it is the only state that survives prolonged opposition. The second rule is compression of decisions. Opposition creates noise by design, opinions, advice, criticism, distraction, all meant to fragment attention. So you narrow your bandwidth, fewer goals, fewer inputs, fewer permissions. Men fail here because they confuse intelligence with flexibility. They want options. Options create delay. Delay gives others leverage. So the internal regime eliminates choice aggressively. You predecide what matters, what does not, what gets ignored, who has access, everything else becomes irrelevant. This is not rigidity, it is insulation. The third rule is emotional sequestration. You do not suppress emotion, you isolate it. Emotion becomes data, not command. Anger is logged, fear is logged, doubt is logged, none of them issue orders. Most men collapse because emotion hijacks timing. They react visibly, prematurely, or defensively. The internal regime prevents this. You feel privately, you act publicly without signal. This asymmetry is power. Machiavelli understood that visible emotion invites manipulation. A man who displays fear teaches others where to press. So you become unreadable, first to others, then to yourself. You stop being the feeling, you observe it. The fourth rule is asymmetric effort. Matching opposition symmetrically is suicide. If they expect 10, you give 0 or 100, never the expected amount. Predictable effort is easy to counter. This is why survivors work, in bursts, not consistency. Long periods of silence followed by sudden output. To observers, it looks erratic. In reality, it is concealment. You do not reveal progress gradually. You reveal results suddenly. This denies interference, but it only works if patience is enforced internally. Which brings us to the fifth rule, consequences. Most men fail not because they lack discipline, but because their discipline has no teeth. They break promises to themselves. Nothing happens. The internal regime does not forgive patterns. Violation creates cost immediately, loss of comfort, loss of privilege, loss of ease, not tomorrow. Now, fear, when internalized correctly, stabilizes behavior. Your weaker self must fear consequences more than it desires relief. Otherwise, it will sabotage you. The moment pressure rises. The sixth rule is energy conservation. Opposition drains intentionally. Conversations exhaust. Explanations bleed focus. So energy becomes protected. You stop explaining. You stop persuading. You stop correcting. Not because you don't care, because defense is expensive. You spend energy only on construction. Finally, the seventh rule. No visible transition. You do not announce change. You do not narrate growth. You do not signal transformation. Narration invites resistance. Change happens quietly. Others notice only when reversal is impossible. That is how power consolidates, not through declaration, but inevitability. By the time they realize you are no longer manageable, the structure is already locked in. And at that point, opposition has only two options: adapt around you or break themselves trying to stop you. But internal control is only preparation. Eventually, power must expand outward on your terms, and that requires a different skill set entirely. Once the internal regime is installed, something subtle changes. Opposition stops feeling chaotic. It becomes patterned, and patterns can be exploited. Most men think enemies block progress. That belief keeps them defensive. In reality, sustained opposition is information. It reveals incentives, fears, and limits. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. Those who resist you most clearly are telling you exactly where power sits. So the objective is no longer survival, it is conversion. The first principle is this: never confront resistance directly. Direct confrontation validates the opponent's frame, it centers them, it turns your movement into a reaction. Instead, you redirect. If they block access, you change angle. If they delay, you accelerate elsewhere. If they question, you stop answering and start producing. This asymmetry forces recalibration. People expect friction to slow you. When it doesn't, they burn energy trying to explain why. That confusion is leverage. The second principle, use denial as positioning. When access is denied, most men argue. They demand fairness. They explain credentials. This is backwards. Denial clarifies hierarchy. It tells you who controls the gate and why. You do not push harder at the gate. You build a parallel entrance. Every system has alternatives, suppliers, audiences, channels, alliances. Opposition narrows your field of vision. Discipline widens it. Machiavellian leverage comes from refusing the obvious route. The third principle, convert hostility into urgency. Hostile environments compress timelines, they force speed, they remove comfort. This is an advantage. While others wait for alignment, you act. While they debate ethics, you execute. While they manage optics, you collect outcomes. Pressure accelerates competence. Men who thrive here stop seeing stress as damage. They treat it as fuel that sharpens judgment and strips indulgence. The fourth principle, weaponize scarcity of access. Once you stop explaining and stop seeking validation, something flips. Your availability drops, your silence increases, scarcity reframes perception. Those who opposed you now wonder what they missed, not because you convinced them, because they lost visibility. This is why Machiavelli advised rulers to control access relentlessly. Familiarity breeds assessment, distance breeds speculation, speculation breeds caution. The fifth principle, force others to move first. Opposition wants reaction, it wants confirmation, it wants to see if pressure works, so you remove feedback. No rebuttals, no public corrections, no emotional tells. When you stop reacting, the system destabilizes. Others must escalate or retreat. Escalation exposes intent. Retreat creates openings. Either outcome benefits you. The sixth principle, use time against them. Opponents often have deadlines you don't. Committees, reputations, narratives all age badly. Silence plus progress creates cognitive dissonance. They said you were failing, you didn't respond. Then results appear. Now they must explain themselves. Time reverses pressure when you let it work. The seventh principle, never seek moral victory. Moral arguments are traps. They shift the game from outcomes to perception. They favor consensus, not control. Machiavelli was explicit. Men judge by results, not intentions. So you abandon the need to be right. You focus on being effective. Effectiveness ends debates permanently. The eighth principle, redefine the battlefield. If you fight where resistance is strongest, you are choosing disadvantage, so you relock. 8. Different market, different audience, different rules. This is not retreat, it is repositioning. Power grows fastest on uncontested ground. Once strength is established, return is optional and devastating. The ninth principle, never expose the full plan. Opposition thrives on partial knowledge. Give them fragments. Let them misinterpret. Clarity is for allies. Ambiguity is for everyone else. This keeps pressure misaligned. They push where you are no longer standing. Finally, understand this. Opposition is not permanent. It is conditional. People resist until resistance becomes costly. When your movement continues without them, resistance turns into negotiation. And negotiation only happens when leverage exists. By now, leverage is forming. But leverage without restraint creates exposure. The final stage is not expansion, it is consolidation, and that requires a different discipline entirely. Most men think the danger ends once opposition weakens. That mistake ruins them. Because the moment resistance softens, a new threat appears, exposure. When pressure fails to stop you, the environment shifts tactics. It no longer blocks, it probes, it watches, it waits for you to overextend. This is where consolidation matters. Machiavelli warned that power gained too quickly and displayed too openly invites correction. What survives is not speed but structure. So part 6 is not about advancing, it is about locking in position. The first rule of consolidation: do not reward late loyalty. When momentum becomes undeniable, people reappear. Former critics soften, silent observers express interest. Opportunists offer help. Their language changes, but their incentives do not. They are not joining because they believe in you. They are joining because they fear being left behind. If you grant access too quickly, you dilute control. Machiavelli advised princes to be slow in granting trust and even slower in sharing power. Loyalty proven under comfort is meaningless. Only loyalty under risk counts. The second rule, stabilize your environment before expanding influence. Men fail here because they confuse visibility with security. More attention does not mean more safety, it means more vectors of attack. So you simplify, you reduce moving parts, you eliminate dependencies, you standardize decisions. Anything that requires explanation is a liability. Anything that requires consensus is a weakness. Consolidation means fewer variables, not more. The third rule, separate capability from identity. When success arrives, the temptation is to become it. You adopt the persona, you perform the role, you start defending the image. This is fatal. Machiavelli understood that rulers who confuse themselves with their reputation become prisoners of it. They act to protect perception instead of position. So you detach, your outcomes are facts, your identity remains flexible. If circumstances change, you change faster than expectations. This is how power survives disruption. The fourth rule, compress communication. At this stage, words become dangerous. Every statement creates alignment or resistance. Every explanation creates interpretation. So you reduce speech, short answers, delayed responses, selective silence. This does not make you mysterious, it makes you efficient. People project meaning into gaps. That projection often works in your favor. The fifth rule, control rhythm. not reaction. Earlier you stopped reacting. Now you dictate tempo. You decide when things happen. You decide when discussions occur. You decide when decisions are made. Others adjust. Those who cannot adapt self-select out. This is not cruelty, it is filtration. The sixth rule: institutionalize your advantage. Raw skill is fragile. Systems endure. You turn habits into routines. You turn decisions into frameworks. You turn success into repeatable process. This removes emotion from execution. Machiavelli admired Roman institutions for this reason. Power was not held by exceptional men alone, but by structures that outlived them. You are building the same internally. The seventh rule: anticipate envy before it appears. Success invites comparison. Comparison invites resentment. Resentment rarely announces itself. It appears as concern, as advice, as subtle undermining. So you preempt, you keep progress private, you limit who knows what, you never explain why something works. Explanations breed imitation. Imitation breeds competition. Silence preserves asymmetry. The eighth rule accepts solitude as permanence, not phase. Many men believe isolation ends once they succeed. It does not, it changes form. Now you are isolated by difference, not exclusion. This is healthier. You no longer need to belong, you need to remain precise. Machiavelli never promised companionship, he promised survival and control. The ninth rule: never confuse calm with safety. When pressure disappears, vigilance must increase. Complacency is how power decays. You continue auditing, you continue simplifying, you continue removing excess. Consolidation is maintenance, and maintenance is unglamorous. That is why most men skip it and lose everything they built. Understand this clearly. Reaching a position is impressive. Holding it is rare. By now you are no longer reacting to opposition. You are no longer shaped by resistance. But you are not finished, because the final threat is not external pressure or internal doubt. It is success without discipline. And that requires one last recalibration. At this stage, most men make the same fatal error. They believe the fight is over. They think endurance was the goal. They think proving people wrong was the mission. They think arriving somewhere visible means they have won. That misunderstanding is why power changes hands so often, because survival is not command. Command begins when you stop needing resistance to define your movement. Earlier pressure shaped you. Opposition sharpened you. Isolation forced structure. That phase is complete. Now the danger is drift. Drift happens when a man no longer has enemies loud enough to keep him precise. When urgency fades, discipline softens. When vigilance drops, entropy creeps in. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Fortune favors the bold, but it abandons the complacent. So the final shift is not outward, it is internal. You move from reacting to pressure to imposing direction. The first rule of this phase: you decide what matters. No more responding to noise, no more reacting to narratives, no more letting urgency be assigned to you. You choose the battlefield, you choose the objective, you choose the pace. Anything that does not move outcomes is ignored. This is not arrogance, it is economy. Power is conserved by refusing unnecessary expenditure. The second rule: you stop explaining your evolution. People will notice the change, they will comment on it. They will ask questions framed as concern or curiosity. You owe no narrative. Explaining invites negotiation. Negotiation invites dilution. Machiavelli advised rulers to let actions speak and words remain scarce, not because silence is mysterious, but because it prevents misalignment. Your results already communicate everything necessary. The third rule: you maintain asymmetry deliberately. Earlier, asymmetry was forced by isolation. Now it is chosen. You know more than you reveal. You move faster than expected. You commit later than others, but more decisively. This keeps leverage intact. The moment others believe they fully understand you, your advantage erodes. The fourth rule: you never outsource judgment again. Approval seeking dies here permanently. Feedback is filtered, advice is evaluated, not absorbed. Consensus is formational, not binding. Your instincts are no longer raw. They have been retrained by structure and consequence. Now you trust them, not emotionally, but strategically. The fifth rule: you accept the cost of this position. Power isolates, not because people disappear, but because alignment becomes rare. You will outgrow conversations. You will outpace environments. You will see patterns others cannot. That distance is not a flaw. It is the price of command. Machiavelli never offered comfort. He offered clarity. The sixth rule: you never confuse peace with safety. Just because pressure has eased does not mean vulnerability is gone. So you keep systems tight. You keep dependencies minimal. You keep your inner circle smaller than feels polite. Maintenance never stops. The seventh rule: you become selective with force. You do not react to every challenge. You do not correct every misstep. You do not engage every provocation. Power is shown by restraint. When you move now, it is deliberate and irreversible. This teaches others something important. Your silence is not absence, it is choice. The final realization is this: when everyone was against you, survival required hardness. Now that you are standing, command requires precision. You are no longer trying to prove you belong. You are no longer trying to be understood. You are no longer trying to be supported. You operate from structure, not emotion. That is what makes you dangerous. Quietly, permanently. If you've made it this far, understand something. This was not motivational content. This was conditioning. And conditioning only works on those willing to be reshaped. If this changed how you see opposition, pressure, and control, then you already know what to do. Like the video, not for the algorithm, but to mark the decision. Subscribe, because this channel is not about comfort or optimism. It is about operating correctly when the world is not on your side. And if you stay, understand this: the next phase goes deeper.